Hello and welcome to B2B Revenue Leaders. I'm your host, Dustin. This episode is brought to you by Testimonial Hero. If you're looking to get more customer stories out there, but you're struggling with the resources to make it happen, Testimonial Hero can help. Learn more at testimonialhero.com. On this episode, I'm joined by Bolaji Oyejide, who is the head of content at Hello Audience. And this is a fun one, from demand desperation to how marketers need to stop hunting their vegetables. I'm not going to spoil any of it, but let's just dive right in. Hey, Bolaji, welcome to the show.
What's going on, Dustin? Excited to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you here. We're going to be talking about a whole whack of stuff. Demand gen is one of the topics we're going to cover. But I'm going to start with background here. So I ask all the guests to, answer a couple questions. What do we want to talk about? And you put some interesting stuff in there that I'm going into blind, and I want to hear you explain. So let's start from there. You wrote, "Stop hunting your vegetables." What does that mean?
Stop hunting your vegetables. Okay, so I have to admit, I'm a parent. My wife and I have two sons. They're 16 and 13 right now. And over the years as a parent, you sort of realize, first of all, you realize with dismay that you're turning into your parents by saying a lot of the stuff they said.
Yeah, I felt that.
Like, doggone it. I had one rule. But you also tend to realize that, kids, sometimes you've got to say things different ways to help them to understand the point that you're trying to get across. And this is very pertinent to a marketer because we often have to repeat the same message, the same value prompts, but say them in ways that are still interesting. And so the other day I was watching the History Channel with the kids and studying sort of the Paleolithic versus the Neolithic era. This is going to sound really nerdy, folks, but stay with me. All right. And I was like, ooh, that sounds like B2B marketing. When you're in this game long enough, Dustin, everything ties back. It's probably a sickness. It's probably a sickness. Okay. But what are we talking about when we say stop hunting your vegetables? So here's what I learned, folks, from the History Channel. Okay. You don't have to do your History Channel watch this week. I got you covered. So back in the day, humans evolved initially as hunter-gatherers, right? This is something we all probably know. They'd wake up in the morning. They're like, I'm hungry. I need to go get some food. And from then on, they would start to track the herd of woolly mammoth or saber-toothed tigers, or maybe not the saber-toothed tigers. They were basically looking for a meal. Now, they were hunter-gatherers, so if there were trees nearby with apples or there were some berry bushes nearby, they would eat those. But if the fruit weren't in season, or if they had hunted all of the animals in that area, they had to move on. They were nomadic. They were in a constant state of hunger, of searching, of desperation. All right? This is almost like demand desperation. All right? Bookmark that. We're coming back to it, Dustin. And so we started out as hunter-gatherers. But this was super limiting, obviously, right? You had to keep moving. You couldn't really put down roots. You couldn't grow very large families. You couldn't do anything else other than search for food. And I think marketing and sales, let's say revenue organizations, have found themselves at this junction in our respective industries where, because of a lot of different shifts, underneath in the ground underneath us, we find ourselves at these crossroads where the stuff that used to work doesn't work anymore. Now, something happened about 10,000 years ago, okay? We started to discover agriculture, and this was a revolution. By discovering agriculture, we could actually plant seeds, nurture them, have them grow into crops, plants, fruits, vegetables that could nurture us. This allowed us to actually put down roots, so to speak, build small communities, which eventually evolved into society. We were able to now spend time, because we weren't out there hunting that woolly mammoth all day, Dustin. We could actually spend time doing things like improving our tools. We didn't have to rely on stone tools anymore. We started to experiment with copper and with iron tools. We started to invent language and art. Go figure. We invented social networks and AI. Okay, that was a little bit later, yada, yada, yada. But you get the point. If you take that analogy now, again, I apologize. I'm a dad. I tend to say everything in metaphors. But if you take that metaphor and you take a look at modern B2B revenue organizations, Marketing automation came about, Dustin, probably around 2005, 2003, 2005. This is when I was a freshly minted MBA, fresh out of school. I worked for IBM a couple of years, and then I started working at a company called Red Hat, open source software company. They just bought this marketing automation tool called Eloqua. They were like, hey, kid, figure out how we use this thing. So I'm back there. I'm in the lab. I'm doing lead scoring, lead nurturing, building landing pages, and build, doing lead gen. It was exciting. It was a new frontier. This was almost 20 years ago now, Dustin. But unfortunately,
that makes me feel old, man.
I'm telling you.
That makes me feel old.
Here's the crazy thing, though, Dustin. It's now 2024, and largely marketing and sales organizations are still using the same playbooks that we invented 2 decades ago. 2 decades. So it's almost like we've been in this hunter-gatherer mode where every day we're going out, all right, I got to get pipeline, I got to get leads, right? It's a demand capture sort of focus. And you go out there and you kill the woolly mammoth, and your tribe hails you, and you come back and it's like, arr, and everybody has food to eat. But we're not spending as much time on agriculture. We're not spending as much time planting the seeds. Now, we don't want to just plant seed. We need both. We need hunter-gatherers and we need farmers. Hunter-gatherers will feed us today, but 6 months from now, if we haven't planted anything, we're not going to have much to eat. And this is the conundrum that revenue organizations find themselves in 2024.
I got it. Yeah, it's funny how that all came from watching History Channel, but it makes sense.
Hobbies.
So like ebooks are essentially a dull spear nowadays, right? Like you're trying to hunt with this thing that doesn't really work. So
I like that.
I think what you're getting to here too is, most of your buyers aren't in market at any given time. Like very few. At some say 5%, 3%, whatever it is. But marketers focus on that. I've been guilty of that in the past. And you just chase your tail of,
right.
Oh, I need to put more into paid ads. Oh, I need to put more in like content campaigns or, God forbid, content syndication, which I don't think works anymore or ever did.
Yeah.
So how do you approach that and divide your time then is kind of my question, right? Because you said you do need to do both, which is true. And I think marketers struggle with how much to spend and what time to spend on what.
This is a wonderful question. This is almost like an existential question for B2B marketers, right? I'm going to share a quick story. So I grew up, Dustin, in Nigeria. I didn't come to the U.S. until I was 17 years old. I came here to attend college. So the first 17 years of my life, I was in Nigeria. I grew up in a big city, middle-class home. Both of my parents were doctors and university teachers. But actually, the city I grew up in is one of the largest by population in the world. And our infrastructure struggled to keep up with the population. So a lot of times electricity would go out pretty much every day, and the water didn't always run from the taps. So often on the weekends, we'd have to go fetch water. We'd drive to the local dam and take these big jerry cans and buckets and gather water for the home. Okay, so if you think about marketers, there's 2 things that they could do to focus their efforts. And there's 2 things that I could have done at that age, or families could have done when I was growing up to focus their water needs. One was become really good at fetching water. Okay? So optimize, build your expertise around, all right, it's Saturday, how are we going to get that water most efficiently from the water source into our home? Because we're not going to have running water. We can't rely on the running water coming out of the faucets. Cool. But here's what some other families did, and they had to have a certain level of means, but they started to dig wells in their own backyard. Okay, again, not everybody could do this, but there were those they'd saved and scraped their money together, and it might take them a year, it might take them 2 years, but they would hire professionals and dig a well that was deep enough to reach a water source. Now, in those 1 to 2 year, that 1 to 2 year period, did they have what? They still had to go fetch the water. Okay. Yeah. They still had to go hunt the woolly mammoth if we go back to our ancient friends. But at a certain point, because they invested in well building, they no longer had that state of desperation. They had their own water source. And so as organizations, a lot of us who work for maybe venture capital funded organizations, we are in a constant state of panic because that's how the rules of the game have been defined. Our investors have said, I'm giving you this money. I want a return. I want to see a return in X amount of time. That X amount of time might not be long enough to build a well. In which case, you just got to go fetch that water every weekend, Dustin. You just got to get good at it. You got to optimize. But marketers now have to decide, okay, I see the rules of the game. I don't have the power to change the rules of the game, but I do have the power to decide what game I want to be in, what game I want to play. At 30 years from now, Dustin, do I want to be known as the best water carrier, the best water fetcher there ever was? Boy, he could carry a bucket. Or do I want to be known as the guy who invested 2, 3, 4, 5 years to learn well building? And at first he sucked at it, like he was the worst well builder ever. But by year 2, he was only below average. And by year 3, he was almost average. And by year 5, he was pretty good at building wells. And his family never had to go without water again. So I think organizations need demand capture. You've got to run your performance marketing. You've got to run your call to action ads, get the demos in, get the pipeline for this quarter. We need that. But if you don't have well builders, you might not be thirsty now, but 6 to 12 months from now, you're going to be thirsty.
Yeah, the interesting thing too, I can't tie this analogy together, so I'm not even going to try, but like there's such an interplay between the two. Right, like on the demand gen side, if you're doing that well, demand capture becomes a hell of a lot easier, and it does more demand to capture, and you have that name. It's one of those things you see with, like, everyone uses this example, but I'm going to use it too, is with Gong, right? Like if you're going to look for any type of recording software, conversation intelligence, because they've done such a good job of just being out there, probably going to go to their website first, and they're going to be in your consideration set.
That's true.
That's because they spend so much money doing all these things that at the time no one else was really doing.
Plus, is true.
I mean, let's be real, doing the paid cap or the demand capture stuff all the time gets a little boring. Like the demand gen stuff is a little bit more fun. So I think there's that for the marketer's sanity as well.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating time to work in B2B marketing. I think with marketing automation on the technology and operational side, maybe it's also bled into the human capital side, in that a lot of investors, a lot of leaders in the C-suite have unfortunately started to treat marketing people like ones and zeros in a spreadsheet, like resources that are there to be, that are expendable. And, I've got to tell you that as a marketer, man, I'm not only trained as a marketer, like there are those of us who personality-wise are just sort of wired to have this curiosity about our customers' needs and experience, to have this empathy for the problems that they're dealing with or living through. And so we're wired that way. We don't just come to work with our lunch bucket and our pail and say, okay, hi ho, 9 to 5, I'm punching the clock. A lot of us are actually personally investing ourselves into this. And so when we're treated like expendable resources, it's almost like burning the candle at both ends. At a certain point in time, that candle is going to go out. And if your candle, as a marketer, if your candle has ever gone out before, it is a scary feeling, because when you suffer burnout, it takes a long time before you can rekindle that fire.
Yeah, it's a good point too. Like burnout happens, it's not just workload. It's when you're doing something you don't really want to be doing as well. Like that contributes to it. Because I will work crazy hours sometimes if it's something I like, or it's a hobby.
What a good point. What a good point.
Fun, right? So I figured out how to tie it back to your analogy here, right? So I think what a lot of people are struggling with, and you mentioned, working at a venture funded company. Let's say they want to build a well. They're like, hey, I need a well. That's what this company needs. But the VC, the board, the CEO, whoever says, no, just go fetch water. I mean, the easy answer is go find another land to build your well on. But aside from that, like, what do you suggest marketers do to help sell that and kind of make that happen?
I love this. So I've got a kid, one of my kids, the younger one, he's 13 years old. He loves math, like obsessively loves math. It's really scary. I stopped being able to help him with homework in maybe the 2nd grade, and that might be stretching it. And we recently started studying game theory. game theory is so fascinating, Dustin. You can watch videos on YouTube about it. You will nerd out over this stuff. So there's one iteration of game theory called the prisoner's dilemma, right? Two guys walk into a room. A third person comes in, brings a briefcase of $1 million, slams it on the table, says, okay, listen, I'm going to leave you guys in here together with this money for an hour. When I come back, you guys need to have decided exactly how you're going to split that money. If you can come to a consensus on how to split the money, you get to keep the money. But if there's no consensus, nobody gets any money. Mm-hmm. So, Dustin, if you and me were those two guys walking in the room, $1 million cash on the table, it's right there. We just have to agree on how to split it. How are we splitting it, Dustin?
I mean, $500K is a lot of money. There's two of us. That would be pretty easy on my end.
Pretty easy. So you say, let's split it $500K. We don't even need an hour. All we needed was 30 seconds. I'm like, hey, Dustin, look, you're in a pretty good spot right now. Testimonial Hero is killing it. You don't really need this money like I need this money. I'll tell you what. I'm going to give you $100K for your troubles, and I'm going to take $900K.
Well, looks like neither one of us is getting any money then.
You're like, nah, right?
Yeah.
That's the initial reaction. Like, there is no way. Like, I wasn't born yesterday. But the thing is, as the clock continues to tick, and you realize that I've dug my heels in, and I'm probably a little bit crazier than you. I'm like, if we're walking out here with no money, I'll do it, Dustin. But you're going to have to go tell your family that you had a chance at $100,000 and you said no because of your pride. The idea here is that if you're playing one round of this game, the crazier person is going to win. The more unreasonable person is going to win. Hands down. I would rather, 500K is a lot of money, but 100K is nothing to sniff at either. We could go on a lot of vacations, this, that, and the third. Now, here's where things flip with game theory. If you are playing multiple rounds, right? If I flip out the first round, I go totally crazy and come up with this unreasonable strategy, you're like, oh, okay, you want to play it that way. Well, in round 2, you're going to be the crazy person. And then in round 3, I now have a calculation like, okay, Dustin is as crazy as me. I'm going to have to figure this thing out. So the more rounds you're allowed to play, the more likely that we come to some sort of equilibrium where we're like, okay, look, we could play 20 rounds and walk away with $0, or we could come to some sort of agreement. It's the same thing to the scenario you laid out where the VC says, I just need you to fetch water, Dustin. And the marketer's like, but I want to be a well builder. If you are only playing one round of the game, the VC has all the cards. You got to fetch the water or be out of a job. It's that simple. But so if we're looking from month to month, from quarter to quarter, if you're just surviving on that quarter to quarter pipeline, you have to play by those rules of the game. The VC holds the cards. If, on the other hand, you are looking career long, your career might be 30 years, 40 years long. Do you want to be you're a water fetcher now. Do you want to be a water fetcher at the end of the 40 years is the question you have to ask. If the answer is no, well, keep fetching that water, but you better be moonlighting as a well builder, Dustin. You better be moonlighting, right? I don't care if you got kids. I have kids right now, but I started moonlighting. I started having a side hustle early in my career when I realized how much water they were asking me to fetch. I started building social networks on my own. I started running webinars on my own, doing email list building, affiliate marketing on my own. You're going to have to build that well on your own time until you become good enough for somebody to pay you to build it.
Nice. No, I think that's a good way to look at it. And the kind of interesting thing there too is a lot of these VCs also made a lot of really bad bets over the past couple of years. And I feel like the pendulum shifted a little bit where it's not spend a shitload of money, burn it all, and hope it works. And it's like 1 out of 100 has to work. Whereas now it's like actually build a profitable business. So thankfully, there's some companies out there that actually see the value of building a well and taking that long-term approach. So I know that wasn't one of the options, and I said that wasn't going to be one of them, but that is one really, right? Like leave and find a company where, you actually get to do the stuff if you can.
Right. To your point, I do think the pendulum is shifting. It's taking longer than a lot of us need it to. Yeah. And so, look, we don't all have the luxury. Let's be honest. We don't all have the luxury to say, I'm just going to sit on the sidelines until I find a company looking for a well builder. You might have to fetch water for 18 to 24 more months, but you could still work on becoming the well builder of choice while you're doing that water fetching. And that's what I would encourage.
Exactly. Yeah. Cool. And then one thing, I got to go back to it because you bookmarked it earlier in the conversation. I think we talked about a little bit of the concept anyways and kind of danced around it, but you mentioned demand desperation. So that was another thing, a term you dropped before we talked. So what is that? Let's explain what that actually is.
Yeah. So I worked at maybe 4 different startups over the past several years, Series A through Series C. And they were all SaaS companies, but they all sold to different audiences. One thing was common, though. There was this constant state of pipeline emergency. There was this constant latent anxiety sitting in the pit of the stomachs of every revenue professional, marketing and sales, right? If you had a good month, well, next month it goes back to 0. You got to do it again. If you had a good quarter, well, your quota is going up. So you have to, squeeze even more blood out of the stone. But in the meantime, so salespeople and marketing people, they are pulling out all the stops. They're going all out. Can you imagine running a marathon at a sprint? They're going all out every month, every quarter. And their reward? Oh, we're just going to lengthen your marathon for you. We're just going to make the problem harder, right? In the meantime, on the buyer side, Dustin, buyers have learned to ignore our ads, right? Remember when banner ads were all the rage? Like that was new technology. And then banner ad blindness became a thing. We learned to ignore those ads. We've learned to sniff, if you're like, hey, I've got this ebook, all you need to do is give me your email address and I'll send it right to you. That used to work in 2010. In 2024, I'm like, you just want my email address so you can give it to your SDR and they can email me to oblivion. And your marketing people is going to send nurture emails that really are not nurturing. Like, I don't want this junk. They might actually be quality content, but my inbox, I treat my inbox as like a processing factory, right? This is from mom, save. This is a bill, save that to pay it. This is from my buddy. Make sure you read that later. Almost everything else is either being deleted or, email from Testimonial Hero, nurture email that I wasn't expecting. I like Testimonial Hero. Let me put it into this archive folder so I can make sure I read it later. Archive folder has 15,000 email messages in it, right? So this stuff did work, but over time, the landscape has shifted. And so there is this constant struggle for attention. You brought up the statistic that maybe 95% of our target buyers, not randos on the street, our target buyers are not actually in a buying cycle right now. These are people who, they might really need what you have to offer. They need what Testimonial Hero has to offer, but they don't have budget. Or they're signed with it, they're locked into a contract with a Testimonial Hero competitor for the next 24 months. Or they have the problem, but there's 10 priorities ahead of the problem. There's so many different reasons. And so demand desperation is where companies are giving these top-down forecasts, often coming from investors' needs, often coming from the CFO in a spreadsheet. And there's nothing wrong with spreadsheets or CFOs or investors. Love them all. But when we don't do a bottom-up forecast, when we don't realistically say, how many people do we think of our target audience do we think are going to be in a buying cycle this upcoming quarter? How many of those do we have a relationship with? This, that, and the third. When it's top down, you're basically saying, this is how much money we need to make. Therefore, yada, yada, yada. This is how many leads, marketing, you need to bring in. And marketing is like, this has no connection to reality. So it's this complete, it's like a state of dissonance that marketers and salespeople are living through. And if we don't call it out, we're going to, just like the teaching profession is losing people in droves, again, parenting story, because a lot of times the conditions for teachers are just untenable. The working conditions for marketers are becoming increasingly untenable as well.
Yeah, I feel that one a little too much probably, because I've been in that situation, right? Where it's, here's the revenue number, all the conversion rates all the way down. We need 500 leads this month. You look at it and you're like, yeah, that's not going to happen. But then I think it causes that disconnect too with marketing and sales, because they're disjointed goals, right? Marketing sees leads. They're like, yeah, I can get you 500 leads. 400 are going to be garbage.
Warm
Doesn't
bodies,
turn into
that's
revenue.
How they are. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It's an email address. It's easy.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So that makes a lot of sense on the demand desperation side. So what is the solution to that then? Like, you're a marketer in that situation.
Yeah.
What do you do?
So there's a few different things, and a lot of these will tie together. If you think about the water fetching versus the well building, we got to do both, but start to build that well. If you think about the hunter gatherers and the farmers, we got to do both, but start planting those seeds. We're not suggesting abandoning what's gotten us this far. We're not suggesting abandoning your serious decisions, marketing funnel. We're just pointing out the inefficiencies in there. Is it really worth burning through 999 ideal buyers who will hate your buying experience just to get that one that closed and be like, well, that worked pretty well. Let's do it again. And then you go through the next 1,000. Instead, we got to do a better job of coming up with messaging that, first of all, builds awareness. Okay. They can't buy from you if they never heard of you, right? So we got to know who Testimonial Hero is. Cool. Then you need to build association. Association is tying the problem that they're having, that they're experiencing, tying that in their minds to Testimonial Hero as the solution. So you want to evangelize the problem and kind of plug how Testimonial Hero helps that. It's not selling at this point. It's simply helping them to make that association. If I say soda, for example, what brand pops to mind?
Coke right away.
Come on. And we didn't even rehearse this beforehand, folks. So you want that association. So we need to solve the awareness challenge.
Yeah.
Then we need to solve the association challenge. And then we need to solve the affinity challenge. So you and I, if we're asked for a soda, we'll say Coke. But if I ask for your favorite soda, it might be Coke for you. For me, it's Fanta, because I grew up, that's the orange one. I grew up drinking that. It was like a prized commodity for us kids. You want to create that affinity where you're not necessarily the best. Okay. It helps if you have the absolute best products on the market, by the way, but particularly for those of us who sell technical based products, there's so much parity in the marketplace, right? Parity. Parity, not Parody, although there's that too. There's so much parity in the marketplace that if you come up with a new feature set, Dustin, within 6 months, I could hire someone that duplicates your features. Easy. There's just too much talent. It's too easy to copy technology. And so if you're building your moat on technical advancements alone, you're going to have your lunch eaten. Instead, we need affinity so that you don't have this constant pressure to be the best, but you want to be the favorite. And a lot of it goes back to how well are you evangelizing the problem? Think about a lot of the stories that I've shared in our conversation today. This is not novel. I don't have a monopoly on solving this demand desperation thing, but I bet you remember the term demand desperation. I bet you remember the analogy of water fetchers versus well builders. I bet you remember hunter-gatherers versus farmers and why you shouldn't hunt your vegetables. So I'm not seeking to give you the same information that ChatGPT could give you or that Wikipedia could give you, because you could argue they're the best. But I almost want to create an association I want to evangelize this problem to where when you hear demand desperation, or as a revenue professional, when you start to feel in the pit of your stomach, that top-down forecast, you're like, where was that testimonial podcast episode where the dude was talking about the farming and right? Create that association. So I think these are some of the things that we need to do. We can't abandon what's gotten us thus far, but if we're not willing to evolve our approach from the stone tools of the past, we'll never get to the civilization of the future.
That's a great way to sum it all up and wrap it all up on the association side. And I mean, I think part of that is, you mentioned the stone tools. You mentioned, getting attention is hard. I get my favorite feature of Gmail now is it says, "Do you want to unsubscribe from this email?" when I've ignored it
Oh,
for
tell me
30
about it.
times, right?
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
I
sweet.
hit that button all the time. So
Yeah.
how I know you're trying a few pretty novel things as well. Like you launched basically a reality show, which is kind of cool and unique in this space.
Mm.
So let's talk about that first, and then maybe
Yeah.
quickly like why you're going that route and how that relates to the association and standing outside.
Yeah. So particularly in the age of AI, Dustin, information is no longer at a premium. Information is cheap. Information is
Yeah.
readily available. What's less readily available is insight. What's less readily available is perspective. What's less readily available is personal lived experience. And so, Dustin, there's probably a lot of people, no offense, there's probably a lot of people that do what you do. There's
Yeah,
probably a
100%.
handful of companies, yeah, that do what Testimonial Hero does. And so, how do we as marketers go from simply trying to be the first to do it or the biggest to do it to becoming their favorite to do it? It's by dialing up the personal experience, it's by dialing up the insights. A lot of the stories that I've shared today, very few of your other guests could share these stories, Dustin.
Yeah.
Very few of your guests grew up in Nigeria fetching water, every week. There's probably a few, but even they wouldn't be able to combine the stories like I combine them. And so being able to tap into your lived experience, but bringing it back to the problem that's relevant to your audience is key. I heard someone express marketing once as this. They said marketing is entering the conversation that's already going on in your prospect's mind.
Yeah, that's good.
So it's not me coming to your audience, Dustin, to say, here's what I want to talk about today. Stocks. Like, what the hell? I'm glad that's really important to you, dude. But that's not what's keeping me up at night. So instead, if I can first, before ever coming on this platform, gain some insight into who is Dustin's audience, what do they care about, what keeps them up at night, what unmet needs do they have? And then I come in and I don't use that knowledge to hawk my wares. I use that knowledge to evangelize the problem, to talk about it, to give them language that you're like, he's reading my mind. Like, he said it better than I could say it. Yeah. That doesn't come from me being brilliant or smart. Some of this actually goes back to some of the stuff I talked about earlier. A lot of us who decided to become marketers did so because we have a lot of empathy. We have a lot of curiosity. We love to solve problems, but not the simple problems. We don't just want to put a Band-Aid on it. We don't want to MacGyver it. We want to sit back and mull on it for a little bit. Let it marinate on us for a while. And then we come up with something and folks are like, wait, no, he didn't. How did he think of that? Think of the people who had a BlackBerry and then saw the first iPhone.
Yeah.
They're like, where's the keyboard? Well, what are you thinking? Or think of the folks who had the fanciest cart and horse, and then Henry Ford comes out with the black Ford. It's a paradigm shift. And I think this is the sort of crossroads we're at as B2B revenue professionals right now. We're not saying go sell your horse and buggy right away. We are saying there's a couple of Henry Fords down the street. We need to go figure out what they're doing in that factory and see how we can jump onto that movement, because whether we adapt or not, times are changing.
No, 100%. And I think, you mentioned not hawking your wares and all that, but I do want to give you the chance to actually talk about some of the stuff you're doing, right? So what's going on in your world? Let's talk about Demand Wars real quick, and then let's wrap it up with where people can reach out if they enjoyed this convo and they want to learn more.
Yeah, so the Demand Wars reality series came from, again, lived experience. My wife and I are going to reveal something very, very private right now. We used to, remember when American Idol came out years ago, the first series, the first season? Yeah. It was so novel that I think we were in our 20s at the time. we would actually call in to vote for like, oh, we got to keep Ruben Studdard in there. We got to keep Clay. We love Clay. This, that, and the third. And we've only seen reality competitions evolve since then, to the point where now last night I watched an episode of Survivor with my two kids. So these reality competitions are part of the zeitgeist. They are part of our experience. A lot of times after work, what are most of us doing to relax? We're turning on Netflix, we're turning on Hulu or Amazon Prime, and we're binging on our favorite show. A lot of times folks will say people have short attention spans. Is that true though? I mean, I'm watching this show called The Expanse. Another marketer turned me on to it. There's 5 seasons. Each episode's an hour long. Every night I'm spending at least 1 hour on this show. Is that a lack of an attention span? No, it's short consideration spans, right? I'm like you said, you're hitting that unsubscribe button in your email really quickly, Dustin. So I decided to make Demand Wars as a reality competition to say, I know what the problem is, or at least I have an opinion. I have a hypothesis on what the problem is for revenue professionals, demand marketers in particular, right?
Yeah.
I want to evangelize that problem. I don't know what the fix is exactly, but I want to get 24 of the smartest marketers I know to share their vision of how we move into the future. But why just do a talking head interview when I could pit them against each other in a Hunger Games style blood sport competition? It sounded better in my head before I said it out loud. In any event, we are currently running this grand social experiment called Demand Wars. It's very much built like Survivor or Hunger Games. Every episode, we vote one marketer off. It's brutal. It's brutal, Dustin. But I'm having a great time doing it. I'm learning a ton, and I'm giving value to the audience as well. And I think this is the future of B2B marketing. We still have to do the blocking and tackling. We still have to have the case studies, the white papers and such. But for those people who are not in market, is there a way we can entertain them while we make our brand their favorite?
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, you sold me on it, so I'll be tuning in to check that out. And then for our listeners, we'll include that. He was
sold when he heard Bloodsport. I'm very concerned, Dustin. Very concerned.
I've seen that movie like 500 times with Jean-Claude Van Damme. So you got me there. So I'll include the link for our listeners, as well as your LinkedIn if they want to reach out, follow you. I know you post on there as well. So thank you. We went way over, but this was a fun one, so definitely worth it. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Dustin. Appreciate you having me on.
Thanks for listening to this episode. My key takeaway is that I need to step up my metaphor game, because Bolaji was pretty impressive with a lot of those metaphors. But aside from that, I find the concept of focusing on creating association and affinity to be really interesting. And just the simplicity of finding unique and memorable ways to express concepts and just make sure that you're top of mind when your audience thinks of that topic. It's an art form. It's difficult to do, but it will pay dividends. So if you enjoyed this episode, hit me up on LinkedIn or go on over to Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star review. It's always appreciated. And as always, I'll be back next week with a new episode.